Start. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for making time to join us today. I think most folks might know me. I'm Reed Shabman. I'm the acting director of the NIAID Office of Data Science and Emerging Technologies, joined here by colleagues in our office as well as GoFair US. And I'm just going to make a couple quick comments to start. I know that we've reached out to you all intermittently over the last several months and even maybe a little bit over a year now, and really trying to tackle a difficult question. You all are working on data of all different types around the NIAID mission area, and we extended an invitation to 11 different resources that we've worked with in the past. And you've uh, talked to us a lot about different things. And we wanted to take this moment at the end of 2025 to kind of reconnect. I wanted to have Christine and her team have the opportunity to kind of um, discuss some of the work that they're thinking about in 2026 and opportunities for additional engagements. Because our ultimate goal is to increase the use of NIAID data and find areas of synergy that work for you. And so what Christine's going to describe today is a brief summary of some of the work we've done to date and hopefully open up the floor for future discussion to sort of guide how we can support the questions, the needs that you have in your communities. So without any further ado, I'm sure we can talk more later. I'll hand it over to you, Christine. Thank you so much for making time to present today.
Yeah, nice to see everyone virtually. Nice to get this in before the end of the year. So we've got some slides to show you and a few things to catch you up on, but we've also left time for discussion, and we have our full team here so we can discuss any of the things, any of the topics that are raised today. This is a time not just for you to hear from us, but for us to hear from you. And so please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I won't. Um, uh, Probably be good enough to answer your chat questions as I'm going, but others are watching and will answer what they can, and they'll save the things that are a little meatier to talk about at the end, but we should have plenty of time for that. Okay, so I'm Christine Kirkpatrick. I guess it says that on Zoom. I'm here from GoFair US, which is a group of several organizations that work together. And thank you again to OddSet for hosting this webinar. And I would like to really start out with a thank you to everyone who's given their input, their feedback from different parts of NIAID, as well as the Data Science Working Group. We've taken it all in, and it's all been extremely useful. And of course, I want to acknowledge our funder, the National Cancer Institute. So again, we're going to start again with why are we doing this? How did we get here? And give you some examples about uh, how you can put these recommendations to use, and then talk about what's next and how you can get involved and work with us more on this. So if we've engaged with you, we've talked a lot about FAIR, but it's not about just making your data fair. It's really about solving these big challenges. And so here's an example of what's possible when you do all the things that the blueprint talks about. Here's an actual example of something someone's done, but these are the sorts of things that are possible when the NIAID data ecosystem uh, is more fair. In this case, someone built a virtual twin of rheumatoid arthritis in a joint. And of course, that's not something that one person's data set, right? That represents 1,000 different biomolecules that have come together, interact in different ways, um, interact with different therapies to be able to model all of these, this really complex system working together to figure out new ways, new methods of treatment. Another example, so when and people still do this, collect things in data lakes, but it's increasingly difficult to just take data and put it in one place, right? Especially as there's these new ways of looking at things that cross different types of research areas. And so it's really important to be able to keep data where they're already collected and then put them together and harmonize across with that data stain in place. And so here's an example of a group that did that. And what it really shows is how important data sharing can be, keeping things in place, and what you can achieve when you work together to make things like that easier to do. And then not just on the science side, but for those of you who host data resources and repositories, um, you also have a great value proposition when you take on this kind of work. It can make it easier for you to find how others have used your data resource and for you to be able to report on that. I think Import has a great exemplar here where they uh, are able to mine their citations to show how many times publications have cited their data. Um, and through using some of these blueprint recommendations, you're able to leverage that to show even more than you realized were there. So we started out with 10 or 11 key repositories in NIAID, sprinkled all across different divisions within the Institute. And again, the goals were to lower the barriers to data access and reuse, but really all in the service of accelerating new discovery of treatments for infectious, allergic, and immune-mediated diseases. And so here's what we've been working on. The project launched September 2023. We spent last year working with those repositories on FAIR assessments. And by February of this year, we had a pretty good idea of some emerging themes. Things were very different in the needs of the different repositories. Data architectures were very different, but common themes stayed pretty consistent. And so working closely with OddSet, this blueprint was drafted and that was first released in April. We've been working with them on gathering your input, making changes as necessary, making things clearer. And in September, right before the shutdown, it was first published. And so now that things are back and open, we've launched phase 2, which this webinar series is, this first webinar in the webinar series is a part of that, really looking at how can this be implemented and what other supportive things are needed by the community to do that. So just reminding you of what we did in that 2024 year of doing these assessments. We figured out everything we could by all of the resources that are already out there, sent some targeted questionnaires to different types of stakeholders within those repositories, conducted some follow-up interviews, and then we had these draft recommendations that again went into those cross-cutting recommendations. And so for each of those key repositories, we have a repository profile and draft work plans that really talk about the cost benefit analysis of to implement these pieces, it takes this much work, but also this much resources, and what conditions already need to be present to make that work. And so with this QR code, you can go in and see the NIAID Blueprint for Digital Objects. Hopefully most of you have already received a link to that as well. It is a living document, and so even today, based on things that come up, we'll be working with OddSet to make tweaks, to take in your input and make sure that it's works for you and has all the resources that you need. So it keys in on 5 different areas, and you might say, well, isn't there already a lot of stuff out there on FAIR implementation? And sure, there is a lot written about FAIR. Not as much on FAIR implementation as you might think. But what we've tried to do is create something that's a single document so that you in a NIAID context can go and say, okay, here's some key things. And if you don't already have a preferred approach, it suggests some to you so that it's not a just think about these things and try and come up with your own approach. You can look at what others are already doing, which makes it much easier to build in interoperability inherent in your resource. It also provides a way for you to come together as you want to within this ecosystem to standardize some of those approaches, to identify where training is needed, and even co-developing if that's of interest, but really making sure that this is something that is got a feedback loop so that things are getting put out. You're figuring out, helping us figure out where the gaps are, and we're filling those as soon as we can. And here are these 5 different areas in the blueprint, which I'm going to give you a little bit about each. For those that did participate in that deeper dive assessment, we have also provided to those repositories this additional mapping assessment that goes back and says, for these 5 areas of the blueprint, uh, here are ways that knowing as much as we know about your resource, that things that you might do to implement them. And we're, again, interested in feedback both on the blueprint or for those who received any of these mapping assessments, feedback there as well. So first up, the minimal metadata schema. The idea here, and it's just these 2 slides, right, really cover the core things that I'm sure you have many metadata fields, or for those who do things in a more database approach, maybe all data to you is metadata. But stick with us. The idea is that every data resource has an author attached to it. Who was the funder? Uh, what is the host, right? Is it a person or a tomato? These are pretty important things. What are the health conditions? And it doesn't mean that each data resource needs to be using Mondo, for example, for health conditions. But it suggests that if you're using something else already, that you consider mapping to those things, that this will be one place that the ecosystem converges as a point of interoperability and translation. And so this is meant to be flexible. Again, as on the previous slide where we said feedback welcome, if something doesn't seem quite right to you, please do speak up, and let's make sure that it fits what the community needs. We have a whole webinar series ready to go. Some of the dates are tentative, and so we'll be, as we send out the invites, that will be the lockdown date, but around February 11th and March 19th, we'll have an initial 90-minute webinar, and then one that goes into extending the metadata schema in March, targeted for about noon Eastern in both cases. So the reason to do these things and to think about what's in the blueprint is that it not only helps you interoperate with other NIAID resources, but it also helps us layer, and other researchers layer, your data for future uses. So one area of interest, some people call it geohealth, is layering on some of these spatial and temporal elements. So for example, we know that malaria has a relationship to the environmental factors, right? How much rain, how hot things are getting. But it's actually very difficult in practice to integrate all of this data, especially if the health-related data doesn't have those characteristics in the metadata for you to be able to put all of this together. And so when you are able to put all this together, you could do something such as look at the household malaria prevalence in Peru from ClinEpiDB, and put that onto a map of Peru and look at some of the average precipitation. You could even you could imagine a researcher doing prediction based on this. And this is just one example to help you see how maybe for your particular case that the researcher set out why they collected the data, they might not be doing this, but many people that follow would love to reuse the data in different ways that you might not have thought of. So persistent identifiers, and again, these are just tasters to give you an idea of what's coming next in some of these webinar areas. This one is planned, again, tentatively for January 26th at noon Eastern. So I think we all use identifiers in our life. The idea of a persistent identifier, or PID, is that it's not just, say, a key field in a database that's specific to your data resource. This is something that lives outside and can be resolved and looked up by an outside service that is going to be around. So I think the most often used ones probably that we encounter are DOIs, right, for publications often. ORCID is another one that's very prevalent. There's also some that, like RAID, it's a new emerging one for projects. Um, whether you're using any of these that are listed here, it's just important that they're unique, that they stay around, and that they have metadata baked into them. And there is an interplay between metadata and using PIDs and metadata. So in the blueprint, we talk about some of the commonly used PIDs. There aren't any thou shalt statements in the blueprint. These are suggestions, and these are also based on what we saw when we did the landscaping of the sample of repositories within NIAID. And so some of these are probably in use. Some of these might not be in use, but aren't difficult or costly to add. Some of them can be uh, relatively easy ads with enough planning. And this is something that in that initial assessment phase, when we were doing that cost benefit, we really mapped out for several repositories and would be glad to talk to you about your specific cases. Okay, so what can you get when you utilize PIDs? So here's an example where say you're a postdoc and you want to look at the prevalence of reagents. Um, here we've got also funder IDs that are embedded. Uh, and these are, instead of saying in clear text who the funder was, giving you a link to that ROR. Again, you might not have thought about your data being used in this way, but when you embed the PIDs with the metadata, it allows you to do tracing all back through to the data sets, to the publications, really figuring out provenance. Again, that might be very important with the study of reagents and maybe quality control. Citation and impact. So we're already to the fourth element in the blueprint. We'll have a webinar deep dive on this, again, tentatively set for March 3rd at noon Eastern, hopefully either first thing in the day for someone like me or lunchtime for the rest of you. Citation and impact. So this comes later in the blueprint, but for some people, this might be one of the places that you want to start, where you want to think about what kind of impact story are you trying to tell? What would you like to be able to track? And then you plan backwards and figure out, okay, well, what PIDs need to be inserted where? What needs to be socialized with the people using your data so that they make sure that they cite it, and have a plan for how you're going to pull that impact out in a way that's not as laborious as it tends to be today. You can see how these things are interrelated, the way that metadata and PIDs are interrelated. Impact and identifiers are very closely related. And so you can see some examples, and again, here from Import, where they've got the citable DOI on the page that links to the identifier all through the journal paper, as well as the associated data. And so that this means that a program can go out and gather all of these things. So as far as what the blueprint recommends, the use of persistent identifiers, but also having formal citation examples. Make it easy, and make it easy for someone to copy and paste the citation. And I think we can all appreciate this. You know, when I was starting out in my academic career, you had to, and I'm sure many of you, we all had to know how to do this without the help of computers, but it's much easier if you can just go and click, and the format that you need the citation in is already there. And these are things that we can point you to about how to find ways to add this into your interface. I mean, this is, and there's also the notion of good, better, best. It's also fine if the first thing that you can do is put the citation suggestion there and to make it clear. And then you go back later and you add the integration. Okay, we're to the fourth element, and this is adding an application programming interface or API. maybe many people on the call aren't going to be dealing with the API, and but this is very important for people that are trying to get access to your data. For those of us old enough to remember I Love Lucy, you remember the infamous chocolate episode? And this is the same idea with data versus an API. It's really helpful to be able to look at the data, but if you're going to deal with a lot of it, you're going to need to deal with that programmatically. And so some people already have APIs and maybe they're already following this. What the blueprint specifies just a few key things about the way APIs interact with programs, formats to use, uh, the documentation be around Open API and Swagger specifications, which have a very high market share and support open science principles, that you do things like version your API so that as someone has integrated your API and you're trying to upgrade it, um, their stuff doesn't break when you upgrade it, and they can, on their own time scale, upgrade to the latest version that you've made available. But we'd be happy to talk with you about this more. This one doesn't have a webinar planned, but we will have a sample code for you as well as a tutorial, and then Q&A at any time that you need or that your programmer needs. Now, many of you might be wondering, can't AI just fix FAIR along with everything else it's quote fixing? Yes and no. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of places that tools can help with FAIR implementation and with some of the things that the blueprint talks about. Here's a few examples. You can use commercial or your sandboxed LLM to generate metadata. And this can be nice for providing like a natural language interface for people who are doing that. Also to help you figuring out some of the formatting. If you say, I need a schema.org tag for this, there's no reason that you need to know that by hand, similar to the citation example of making it easy for someone to copy. You can make it easier on yourself here. Another place LLMs can be helpful is with some of the data QA for identifying those inconsistencies and anomalies. Also documenting what schema you used, if or maybe checking and versioning of the schema that you've used, or mapping between schemas. And I'm not saying that it does everything magically. All of this needs to be checked heavily. One place that especially we're hearing that the AI tools aren't quite good enough, but we expect it to get better, is in suggesting alignment with existing ontologies and even creating ontologies that people are saying at the moment that it takes more time to correct the work of that an LLM does in this regard than just to do the work as a data steward, experienced data steward. But you know, we'll see how it is by next year. There's also a lot of new tools out there for mining publications to assess impact. Many of these are proprietary, and so I didn't suggest any names, but we're seeing more open source approaches, and this is also a place where this community can be exchanging best practices in this area. And last but not least, AI tools can be really helpful for extracting entities and their relationships so that you can build a knowledge graph so that your users could query that also via like a chat GPT-like interface. So just a couple ideas for you. Okay, and last but not least, the blueprint has this piece about training and engagement. So I think we all recognize that there's the technical side and there's the socio-technical side. And it does take humans to implement these things and to make sure that they work for the stakeholders trying to use them. It's also important to make sure that we're kind of sharing community practices and lessons learned. And that you've got a place to advocate for things that you're needing from NIAID and also from the community at large. And so to that end, we've got a network of repository liaisons that's forming. we've emailed the key repositories, but something else that we'd love to hear from you is if you weren't on that initial list that I showed early in the presentation, and you'd like your resource or repository to be represented, please self-identify or nominate 1 to 2 people from your repository so that we can include you in our kickoff meeting in January. Um, we'll, of course, be there, Go Fair US and OddSet, but the idea is to let you shape what this group is going to do, starting with developing a lightweight charge. What would you like to work on? What are your initial priorities going to be? When do you want to meet? Um, and again, very lightweight, but to help you self-organize. One of the things we'll be asking for feedback on are things like this, our webinar series. Are these the things that you want to hear about, or even timing or times of day that work for you? We're also creating standalone content from each of these and a few other things, such as I mentioned, the API resources that aren't strictly delivered as webinars. And then also a place for introductory material, such as a Pathfinder. So there's a lot of phenomenal material, much of it created by NIH, that's already out there that explains some of the kind of prerequisite topics for some of these webinars. And for people who want to go back and learn more about a particular area, we'll have this Data 101 Pathfinder for you to find kind of the best of these resources. And with that, next steps, as I mentioned, we're working on gathering those repository liaisons together. We'd still love to hear from you about the blueprint. If there's anything that could be better, or places that you think, I don't know if this is what I would list here is the example, we'd love to hear you make the case for listing other things. We're building those training materials that I mentioned. We'd love to get feedback on those as we go. We're also working on being really deliberate about how we communicate to these on these things, and having materials that help you if you'd also like to push some of these messages out to the communities that you serve. And also making sure to document successes in this area and make sure that people know about the good work that's being done here. Because all of this, of course, has been going on long before this project. And we want to make sure that your efforts here are known. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen, and we'll move to discussion. And while people are thinking about questions they might have too, I'd like to invite any of the members of the team, OddSet or Go Fair US, if there's points that they'd like to raise where we kept things brief because of time, please do.
Christine, could you start by just addressing Robert's question in the chat? I can read it if you'd like.
Yeah, okay, I'm looking at it right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, the short answer about, and let me repeat this. In talking about the API, it was mentioned that code samples and tutorials would be made available. Where can we get those, and when could they be made available? So I think our intention is to put the code on GitHub, and to put tutorials on our Go Fair US website, also linked from the OddSet webpage in the NIAID website. Those are slated for February, I believe. Doug, is there anything more you'd like to say about that? When, of course, Doug also said in the chat that he was having some issues with his audio. But Robert, feel free if you have any follow-up questions. I hope that's helpful. You're always welcome to get in touch with us. Julie can put in the chat the central email that goes to all of us, or my email is pretty easy to find too.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was answered in the chat already, Christine, kind of, but Beth from NHLBI asked, is a digital object an entire data set or a single variable? I don't know if you wanted to quickly expand on the answer there.
So in our original draft of this presentation, we actually had a section on entity level because it is a really good question, and it depends some based on your resource and also the way that that you're serving your community. People have different levels that are needed. It ends up being a kind of complicated answer. Um, so I guess the the hand wavy lazy answer is what works for your resource. But John or others, do you want to say something more intelligent about this?
Um, yes, I would, and Nancy may say something more concise and elegant. But my we put a fair amount of thought early on in the project into providing a nice generic answer to this question that could help us treat all the repositories in a consistent way, even though the levels of entities that they're dealing with can be quite different. Some are files, some are records, some are other kinds of coordinated objects or collections of objects. Um, and so we actually have a white paper that gives some fairly lengthy guidance about how you can think of your different entities as data records, if you like. Even though they're not file-based, you can think of them in ways that are easy to evaluate from a FAIR perspective and give them proper recognition. Um, so I'll dig up the Zenodo link to that and copy it into the chat in a little bit. And that's for those who really would like a more detailed discussion of that question, in addition to what are in the slides that we can present.
And this might also be a topic that the repository liaisons discuss. We could also, talk
Absolutely.
with you about your individual case if you wanted to. Um, but yeah, it can be a bit complicated, I guess, is the only simple answer.
Well, that
Um,
that might actually dovetail into a question that was just put in the chat uh, about it's got about speaking individually. So I think it would be good to maybe spend a couple minutes here. So for each repository you reviewed, will there be an individual session to go over the assessment you created? I don't know if you wanted to speak a couple words about those individual assessments and the potential for a follow-up discussion on those for folks that are interested.
sure. So we have tried to pivot towards something that's a bit more scalable than working directly in detail with every single repository. But for those that were reviewed already, I believe in the email where we shared those assessment mappings that we also invited people to have follow-up discussions if they'd like. And so, John or Nancy, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Well, I can start. Hi, I'm Nancy Hopel-Heinrich. Yeah, each of the repositories that we looked at have a fair assessment summary. It's kind of a merging of both how the repository seems to map to the blueprint, plus some questions related to FAIR, because it's part, so it's kind of a hybrid document in a way, but it's definitely the kind of information we were able to get by looking at public records and kind of analyzing what we could see from your repository. These are the summaries. Not all of them have we've been able to have conversations with people about them as we do this assessment, the summary. So if you're interested, we definitely would be interested in hearing more from you about whether we're right, whether we were able to read, the public information without, being able to talk to you. Again, that Christine mentioned the kind of, when it comes to the work plans, there were some interview questions that were much more detailed, and that's informed the blueprint. So that's how the fair assessment summaries are the kind of the transition there. But definitely interested, just need to contact, I guess, either the general number again or address again, or Christine or one of us. I mean, liaison with myself or maybe John, and then we can figure out. what's possible. And it definitely is possible to discuss the summaries during the liaison discussions is too, hopefully. I mean, we just have to figure out yet what the scope of that is and how much time people have, but that's something that would be useful to do because I think it helps us kind of look across what the requirements are and recommendations are for blueprints across the landscape. So that'd be very useful discussions as well.
Thanks, Nancy. I mean, to build on that, one thing we could do is send an email out to everybody that was on the calendar invite, just with a couple, reach out to, this email address if you have a question about the assessments, that type of thing. And then that way we could also include like Lisa Mayer and Dasha Putkanaya from our office, so they're aware. Because I think it does, this is somewhat of a proposal of what we would like to do to support you moving forward. And that is not set in stone. And one of those things might be that there's an opportunity with, part of the reason we wanted to send those assessments out was to sort of see who's interested and say, we didn't get it all. I mean, Nancy did a phenomenal job with her team on this, right? But I guarantee you it's not 100% accurate, right? But then the question becomes, okay, well then if we wanted to get it to become more precise, who should we talk to that, everybody's busy. So like, who's the right representative there? And it could be another way to engage with us, moving into the future of like a point of contact. Yeah. I think a couple more questions came in.
Okay, so one I replied to the person in the chat. And I think the other, Sue's question is a great one that John just replied to. But yes, as one of the goals or objectives of this work to increase the reuse of the NIAID data, definitely that's, I'd say that's one of the prime goals of this work. Anything that really helps researchers find and reuse that data so that it can have as much impact as possible in those mission areas. Well,
Thanks.
and
Yeah, the way we've thought about this is that's absolutely our main goal. Perhaps there's more than that, obviously, too, with connecting different types of data and putting it together, which Christine touched on as well. But we sort of thought of the blueprint, although it's very, very high level and somewhat generic, it is to capture the depth and the breadth of the resources that are supported by NIAID. And so some of those underlying slides that you showed, Christine, I think are kind of like the nuts and the bolts of helping to increase the use and reuse of that data, at least at the metadata level.
Well, and it's great if we've anticipated everything you wanted to know and are already set to do it, but we'd really love to hear from you. If there's something where when you put this on your calendar, you thought, I hope they talk about this, and we didn't. What are those things? Because we really want to hear from you what we're missing or what no one's thinking about, especially if there's something that your resource or your part of the community has really needed in this regard. And it's okay if it's a little bit tangential to FAIR. It doesn't have to be a FAIR topic, but something that's rooted in making data easier to use or find. Okay, and so that's a vote from Sabina to see more in-depth examples. And so that is hopefully something you notice this time if you'd been on previous presentations, where now that we've really deeply engaged with some of the repositories, trying to find exemplar examples or trying to come at things from science use cases. And so we'll promise to do that more and more in our guidance to you.
This is Sue from Frontier Science. Can I ask one other question?
Yeah, please.
So I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but like obviously there's a lot of repositories. You reviewed a lot of them. And I think the hardest thing on project level is to just advertise these repositories in the public domain. And obviously your group is doing a good part to help that. But when the ACTG repository, and it since has grown into other networks, first came out, I think the network or maybe even NIAID sort of had some seed funding, and there was opportunities there to stimulate people actually going in and using those repository samples for concepts. And so I guess my overall question is, because I often asked, even working with the NCI, like the way to get people to use specimens is to actually create opportunities, either RFAs coming out or other types of seed grants to sort of encourage at least some of the aims in the new grant to use these specimens that are in banks all over the world. And so my question to you is that, do you see future opportunities coming out that will allow for that after you've done this great work in creating the blueprint?
Over to you, Reed.
The government question. Thank you, Sue, for the question and the comment. I don't disagree with you on those points. I think the short answer is, in our office, trying to respect your time, we're doing as much as we can within our ability. To that end, I really liked your example about incentivizing folks to use ACTG data and materials. As we're going through this process, that was kind of one of the goals, and it's different for everybody on this call. They have different specific use cases, but if you have an idea that you would like to discuss further, specifically to ACTG, we'd be happy to have a high level conversation, but I don't want to go, I sort of have to follow, we want to be very consistent with like the folks that were, I think through the program officer of ACTG at NIAID in coordination with our office. That's a conversation we always welcome. I don't know if that helps or not.
But yeah, I was actually asking that's fine with the ACTG. I mean, there's other leaders on this call from the ACTG, but I was asking actually in general. Right. I mean, a good part is, even at a project level, ACTG and beyond, I think it's sort of like, how do you advertise, right, to junior investigators, young investigators, people who are seeking opportunities, rather than starting a brand new grant, collecting new specimens? There's a lot out there, right? And so I guess my main question broadly was that, do you see in this new landscape we're dealing with opportunities coming out, funding opportunities, resource opportunities coming out somewhere from the NIH to encourage the use of specimens? That's basically the broad question.
To encourage, okay. I'm a little hesitant to answer that on a Zoom call right now.
Understood.
But I get that. I just want to make sure I got the point, which is, do you see opportunities coming out to encourage the use of specimens, biospecimens? I will say that, yeah, I think, again, I'm going to answer very specifically, counterpart, yes, the short answer is yes. That's important to us, and it's something that we'll continue to communicate there. There are parallel activities in other resources that have a lot of specimens, where there have been sort of projects where we're trying to sort of better represent what's in that collection so that people can see what is there, almost like in a dashboard type situation. And I don't want to speak in too much depth because it's not I don't feel comfortable speaking about the specific examples there, but I could say that those types of activities are ongoing in certain resources. We'd love to have that conversation there. And then to the broader NIH question, I think, if you just read kind of gold standard science, if you read some of the marks from the director, what you're saying is consistent with the idea of reproducibility, transparency, finding data. I think all those are priorities. How that goes from concept to product is not clear, but I think capturing that, what you said, capturing that in a clear message is something that we should. I'm glad you brought that up, that we can capture that again.
Yep. Thank you, Reed.
Yeah, and related to Sue's question about kind of advertising what you do, and actually harkening back to what Sabina mentioned about exemplars, this is really meant to be two-way. So if in that presentation you thought, gosh, our repository you could have had a slide about what we're doing because we're doing something great in there, please make sure we know about this. And I will make sure to incorporate that, not only in upcoming webinars where appropriate, but through some of the work that we've already done. When it's okay with the repository, we go and we use those examples, not just in other NIH venues, but when we're presenting to like at International Data Week, to other communities, we're making sure that we're spreading the word that NIAID is at the cutting edge of how to do these things, and that the biomedical science community is the community to watch for some of these techniques, which is also a bit selfish because it means that the way that you're implementing FAIR could catch on in other places and then make it a little bit easier on you when you're trying to cross boundaries like that GeoHealth example. And maybe it's a good time for John to mention some of the work with FAIR implementation profiles, and because we didn't touch on that again, trying to make it a shorter story, but it's a fun area. And over to you, John.
Yeah, but before we go to John,
Yeah.
I just want to that point, and this is somewhat tangentially related, but we have members on the call here from the bioinformatics resource centers, and for example, I'm not speaking for them, but I think they have content that's available on YouTube. They had done a codeathon recently. Those are the types of things, if you are doing activities, we're happy to amplify. Well, we don't need to, we might not have the expertise or the know-how to run those for your particular resource. We are happy to amplify those activities to the public as well. So over to you, John. That was just a quick side comment.
Excuse me. Yes, a lot of what we've been doing throughout this is look for ways to make the interoperability more frictionless so that everyone can take advantage of it, and also to make visible what people are doing so that people, the different projects, can take advantage of each other's work and find common ways of doing things. And one of those activities that we'll be talking about in, I think, our last webinar is what's called FAIR implementation profiles. And it's a process where the repository can, excuse me, can complete a form essentially to describe the technologies, the services, the standards that it's using to make itself more fair and to achieve better interoperability, essentially. And by getting a lot of the repositories to do that together, we're able to identify the commonalities, identify new trends, identify changes over time, and basically collect a lot of information that's hopefully useful across all the communities that are represented here. So that's something to look forward to in coming months. And some people will, as part of the evaluation we've already done with them, we will be talking to them about the FAIR implementation profiles that we've started to fill out for them and that we'd like their help to complete. So that's a goal and an opportunity, we think, to accelerate the commonality that we're working on.
Thanks so much, John. Christoph.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm a little bit newer to these efforts. I've taken over now the PI for the pathogen data network at Interim, while we are hiring some new director on the SIB side. I think is a really important effort. My experience is that the data resources, they typically are very conscious about like the different standards, but it's often like the interface with the researchers where a lot of work needs to take place. And I think, I wonder, so I think the interoperability and interface between the repositories, I think is happening already a fair bit, and I'm sure that the discussion that you're catalyzing are also facilitating. But very much, I think that the big challenge is with the interface to the researchers, and in particular, there to find the right level of granularity that it's still that they can still deal with these standards without being completely lost, but at the same time that it's that there's the right level of complexity, and this is probably also changing over time.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. I think this is another place that the repository liaisons could work together as a network to push some of these things, to say uh, where people see the need for slight improvements, it's also a good time uh, to make sure I mention that our project works hand in hand with the work at Scripps Research that is also directed by OddSet for the NIAID Data Ecosystem Portal, where they try and provide a unified way to at least find your way to some of these things. And also some of the work they do is important in showing some of the metadata improvements that different resources have made. So let's see, we had a question in the chat about the FAIR implementation profile, and sometimes, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Christine, can I just make
Oh,
one
sure,
more quick
please.
comment
Yeah.
to Christopher? Yeah, so I just wanted to say really quickly before we go to that, one thing is that we are not, we recognize that a lot of these activities are already happening. And I just sort of reiterate my point about amplifying, like helping, and going back to the question from Sue, I believe, helping to amplify some of the activities that are already happening as specific examples within the NIAID resources, all boats rise. And so we welcome you to kind of share some of the ongoing activities with us. And maybe there's an engagement that's kind of a little bit farther down the line, or maybe there is still an opportunity to engage, but the specifics might be different. So just sort of understanding, what's ongoing is also very, very helpful. Over.
Yeah, well, and Wiria actually put some links in the chat. And so as an example there, Doug Phills from our team was at the Codathon and really enjoyed it, by the way. uh, uh, but when we can embed and understand things, then that gives us another way that's a little more frictionless for you, that we understand some of the resources that are out there and we can bring those through in those exemplar examples, or just making sure that we're helping to promote the good work that you're doing as well. And I did want to uh, assuage your worries that whatever level you want to engage on this, if you're uh, uh, feel insecure when you're saying PID and you don't know about all those different ones and you want to talk at a real introductory level, that's great. If you want to go hardcore, we are at, some of us are based at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. We will talk to you about AI stuff and knowledge graphs and, you know, deep technical topics. So we try to run the gamut there. Chris, did you want to say something before we let John show the FIP slide?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Christoph, there's another weird connection here, which is I work with the PDN also through SciLife Lab, so I'm the open science advisor there, and I work with colleagues of yours on informing, how best practices on FAIR. So yeah, actually, we did even connect with you recently, or we were trying to make a connection recently because we thought there were some really great examples and PDN, as well. So, please do reach out to us when you're ready. Yeah, that would be great to talk to you further.
Well, and for those who don't know, Chris is part of Go Fair US.
Yeah, and I'm also part of San Diego Supercomputing Center as well. So,
Okay, so John, here's I think you've got two slides. I didn't know which one.
Yeah, two sounds about right. The so the fair implementation profile is what I was talking about earlier, and it's basically a set of precise information about how the community, or in our case, repository representing a community, uses different services and specifications and data policies to make its data more interoperable. And so on the next slide, we can see how it's sort of divvied up, in that our background, of course, is with the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable format that comes with FAIR, and all of the different kinds of principles that they define for how to make data more interoperable. Um, and the FAIR implementation profile divides those up into specific kinds of assets, specific kinds of standards that you can use for your taxonomies, for your ontologies, for your metadata specifications, and so forth. And this whole thing serves as by filling out that information, this process serves both to collect the information in a way that everyone can see it in a standardized way, but also for you to think about, gee, how is it that we're handling our data usage license, for example, down toward the bottom, or what have we done about putting our metadata into a registry aside from our own? So it's as much a thought provoker and community exercise as we intend to bring it forward in the webinar later in the year, the project later in the year. And I can talk more to individuals with more details if they'd like to look into this a little further on their own. Happy to talk about it anytime.
Thanks so much for that, John. And I've done this for some of the communities that I've worked for as a user, not just as someone who's helping to deliver this. And I can tell you it's really valuable. It's like the idiom, the journey's the reward. It really prompts you to think about things where you didn't realize you might have a gap, or you didn't realize you weren't declaring something as a standard that you were hoping other people would use. And so it's very helpful. Let's see, we had another question from Kate who wanted to hear a little bit more about the API resources that we mentioned. And Doug, could I tap you to say a little bit more?
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Christine?
Yeah, and this is Doug Phils from GoFair US and the San Diego Supercomputer Center.
Yeah, my apologies. I had issues with the desktop, so I'm on my phone right now. Sure. I mean, we're working on some API examples, as Christine mentioned, that would be provided in GitHub. This is really kind of looking at APIs for access to, the resources being described here, right? And so really trying to apply, how those resources expose using the minimum metadata, leveraging PIDs and things like that, all in kind of the best practices approach to APIs. So it's really just kind of a basic implementation of that. And then additionally, these types of resources can also be exposed simply through web architectural patterns. That is, just simple URLs on the web can be sufficient in the model that were put forward. So for those groups that don't want to or don't have the resources to stand up a full API environment, there are patterns to doing this just using standard web architectural approaches, web servers and things like that, or object stores.
And please let us know if you have any follow-up questions on this now or later. Either's fine. We do have 1 more minute if there are any additional questions.
Not to keep us here longer, but Doug, thank you for that answer. That sounds great. And I guess the follow-up would just be, are there plans for a more like that's specific to the API, but a more general place where repos can kind of share with each other lessons learned about, oh, this is what I learned about implementing PIDs, and this is what I learned about advertising, kind of a knowledge exchange about implementation of these aspects.
And sure, I mean, I'll hand that over to Christine, but I think that's maybe, Christine, what some of the work with the liaisons is hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, exactly. So as an initial step, it's setting up that repository liaison network as a place of exchange, and for that group to tell us what would be most helpful as a venue for sharing that out, and how to do that, and how to solicit those lessons. So that's definitely the intent there, and we'd love to hear from you if you think there's other models, or if you want to point to things that you think are doing this that we can amplify.
Great. That sounds great. Thank you so much, and appreciate the webinar. Great webinar today.
Yeah, thank you all for being on. I know the time between Thanksgiving and New Year's can be kind of a no man's land. So anyway, thanks everyone for being here and for your time. And we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And you've got some email addresses that were in the chat. You can reply to the calendar invite or other emails from us if there's anything else, thoughts you have later. And Reed, do you want to close?
In 3 seconds, thank you very much for all the feedback that helps us construct the best way to work with you in 2026. So thank you for your time.
Take care.